Seems fair to me. Fair decision.
Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. We are still apart, but there are many things to talk about, even though we are sequestered. And we've got a great panel coming your way. The regular crowd in the house, starting with the news director for the Big 550 KTRS, Wendy Wiese, along with Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. From the Riverfront Times and St. Louis in the Know with Ray Hartmann on the Big 550 KTRS every weeknight at 9, Ray Hartmann. And of course, Mr. Alvin Reid from the Dave Glover Show on 97.1. Oh, the Cowboys, the Dallas Cowboys, the St. Louis American.
It's
every week night. He's getting a free
draft weekend.
Last week it was the Jayhawks. We're gonna have to put. I think that's a non-essential mug there, Alvin.
I need another. I need another Channel 9 mug because I didn't have one, and it met the kitchen floor a couple of years ago. So
make a donation.
I
can donate.
I will do that.
All right. Hey, here's the latest, ladies and gentlemen. Franklin County is going to open up this weekend movies, movie theaters, and gyms and concert halls in Illinois. The governor there, J.B. Pritzker, has extended the stay-at-home order. However, masks will be required inside public places. In Missouri, the governor wants to open things up on May the 4th, but in St. Louis, Bill McClellan, the mayor says she wants the stay-in-place order extended, as does the county executive for St. Louis County, Dr. Sam Page. What do you make of Franklin County opening up pretty much before everybody else except the state of Georgia?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that the epidemiologists say it's a mistake that everybody has to do all this together, but that's unrealistic. I mean, the rural counties just are not going to adopt the same more rigid restrictions that we have. And I think that in the urban areas, we should have them. And ideally, everybody would adopt them, but it's understandable that Franklin County is saying we're going to try to edge out there into the ocean a little bit and see what it's like. And I don't blame Mr. Brinker, the county executive, for it at all.
I disagree with my fellow founder. I don't know if I blame the guy because I don't know him, but we're too connected. It's just too soon. We all want to open. I mean, we all want to go back to some semblance of normal, obviously. I don't think anyone enjoys this, whether it's Parson or whether it's Franklin County. And Franklin County is very connected to St. Louis. I mean, it's not far away. And even if, and of course, I did a column this week on Saline County, which is the hottest spot in the state, is in the middle of rural Missouri. So I wouldn't be as sure as some people are that it doesn't affect.
I understand your point. I'll go right back to you. But, Governor Parson has already said that the state restrictions, Franklin County is going to have to live with them. So, it isn't going to be like restaurants are going to be jammed with people or people going to bars or more than 10 in a movie theater. So it isn't like Franklin County is being terribly reckless, I don't think.
I just think it's too soon.
Well, the people, we have a text line at the radio station, and we've heard from many people who live in Franklin County, and they are not happy at all with Presiding Commissioner Brinker's decision to live free and not in fear. And because the virus doesn't stop at the county line, the virus doesn't recognize the county line, as Ray said. We're all interconnected. There are people who live in Franklin County, who work in St. Louis County. And I'm afraid that what we're in for is a sort of it's going to be like a dance. We're going to see relax, and then a spike, and then a panic, and then another shutdown. And I think that's going to be kind of a wave for the foreseeable future until we get out in front of this in terms of testing for those antibodies and then the plasma infusions, or until we have a vaccine. But I think it's way too soon.
Well, who knows?
Ideally, of course, you're right. And I heard Bill Gates on some cable network saying that everybody should be doing this completely together. But I'm just saying, I think that's unrealistic. I don't think.
You're right.
Counties and say we want you to abide by the same regulations St. Louis is. I mean,
well, is there a possibility then? What if St. Charles decides to open up partially? Will people in St. Louis County or St. Louis City who currently have higher rates of coronavirus than they do in some other counties, what if they start going out to those counties like Franklin?
That's what I was
going to
say about Franklin
for dinner or for the gambling boats.
Right.
And I'll shift my computer here a little bit. The sun just came out and lit me up. That's a good thing, I guess. I was about to speak, and
not just the sun.
That's what I was going to say about Franklin County is that people from St. Louis County will go there and go to the movie, and people will go to a concert hall, even if it was just 10 people or whatever. And just like happened here, so people thought they were having some simple events with a few people, and a few thousand people showed up.
Right.
The same thing is going to happen. I think once again, like I said last week, I think this is not a stunt, but is making a point. 10 people in a movie theater. I used to work in a movie theater. You won't make any money. Okay. You'll make zero money. You'll cost yourself money by being open if you just can have 10 people in there watching a movie. So basically, I think it's just making political point. I think he's trying to frame work for his future political career in Franklin County.
Very well. By the way, I think I share all of our sadness to learn that the Moolah Theater announced that it is closing down near St. Louis University. That's too bad.
Very sad.
Ray Hartmann, last night you talked about the county executive, Sam Page, on your program. He was on my program this morning, and we're talking about that almost $180 million federal money that has to be dispersed. Now, he doesn't want to have the St. Louis County Council act as oversight, doesn't want the county council to have any say in how he disperses it because he believes we're living in an unprecedented emergency and he has to be nimble to get that money out. How do you feel about this?
Well, I didn't have Sam Page on. He doesn't. They don't commute. They only go with the big shows, you know.
That's right.
But I did have Kelly Dunaway and Mark Harder. Mark Harder, the Republican, Kelly
Dunaway,
the Democrat. And first of all, this is a really interesting dynamic in the county council. It's a partisan divide, but not on a partisan issue. So in other words, it's not like guns or abortion or whatever, some we normally think of. In this case, the Republicans are taking the oversight argument that they, in the national level, oppose. So it's kind of interesting. And I'm generally sympathetic to them on this. I think the big loser in this is Sam Page. He owns this. He when he took over from Steve Stenger, the first thing he was going to be about was better communication and respect for the county council. So he owns this. And the Democrats, in my mind, he basically is writing the closing argument for Mark Mantovani, who is my guest tonight. And
really?
I do. I think because he's just not up to handling this, managing this.
If I could throw something in here, Ray, I don't think you can let the Democratic county council members off the hook at all. I think this has been terrible the way they've done it. And, you know, at least the two portions of the bill, as I recall, and the smaller part was for the health department right away. And Tim Fitch, one of the Republicans, said he wanted to add on like $1.8 million for first responders, because that's Fitch's political persona, being the police chief. And they supposedly had a deal. And then when the bills were presented, that little Fitch part was put way over in the big part that Sam Page wants to spend without any oversight. And the Republicans are 100% right to oppose the Democrats. And I think that the Democrats on the county council really embarrassed themselves.
It was really interesting what Mark Harder said on Ray's show about the fact that
we have to have a truce. Let's stop plugging our own radio shows left and right.
Plug anything. I'm not plugging it. I was plugging yours. You got Sam Page. You landed a big.
We all listen to each other, Charlie, for heaven's sakes. But no, Harder said that if this had happened under the Stenger administration, that Sam Page would have been out front screaming like a very unhappy politician for this lack of shared oversight that he would have been with the people he now opposes so vociferously.
Right.
To be fair, Kelly Dunaway did
money. I mean, Sam Page had that. You remember that problem with the contract for the jail phones, and Sam Page and his spokesperson wouldn't talk about it because they cited a cone of silence. I mean, you can't let people who believe in the cone of silence have all these tens of millions of dollars with no oversight. That's crazy.
Can I say one thing?
Let me
Real quick, Kelly Dunaway did make their position, and I'm with you generally on this in terms of who won the messaging. Their argument is the portal will have a lot of openness and accessibility. I want to be clear about that.
Well, we haven't even talked
but,
about.
But I'm not disagreeing. You know, the interesting dynamic on the county council, I think, is it's not so much Republican and Democrat, is it's 4 women and 3 men. And if you ask the man, they say it's nothing. If you ask the women, you get a very different answer. And I think that's a telling part of this argument, that the women.
Well, you agree with the men, so you're against the women.
I agree with the men on the substance of this. I also agree with Kelly Dunaway that there is an air of that's, perception's reality. And I think that's one of the reasons there's tension on the county.
But Ray, the city and you didn't give any background. The city and the county have both taken their transparency portals live today. Not that that's making anybody on the panel.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. Right. Voters don't go to portals, and the voters don't care at the end of the day how the money gets to the PPE or to the testing, as long as it does. And with all due respect to the county council, and I happen to agree with the Republicans and you, Ray, and you, Bill, and everybody, I don't think voters are going to make this an issue, how the money gets out, just that it gets out.
And this is going to get resolved in the next week or two. So this is not, I think it's more interesting at how it plays out. I do think it will affect, I do think it will be an issue in the county executive's race. I agree with you, Charlie.
Let's go to Alvin Reid on another topic. Hey, Alvin, I want to ask you about Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who has gone after Harvard University because Harvard University has a $40 billion endowment, but got, $10 or so million from the federal government, for the stimulus for companies that are suffering as a result of this pandemic. So Harvard gets the money, but then it sent the money back. It's been reported in today's St. Louis Business Journal that Washington University got $22 million, but Hawley didn't go after WashU. What gives?
I think it was just a simple blunder, and I'm not making an excuse for him. I'm just not all that impressed with him. And he saw that number, wanted to go after Harvard, went after that Harvard, and kind of like what I'm sure goes on in the White House, somebody had to tap him on the shoulder and say, oh, by the way, Washington University got this much, and they have this much in endowment. So I think it was an oversight on his part. It's a lot of blustering right now going on. It's a lot of politicking going on right now. And I think he just was a victim of that. On top of, like I said, I'm just not really all that impressed with the young man.
Well, I disagree. I mean, Bill, go ahead.
No, Wendy, I didn't have much to say, really. You go ahead.
No, it was, I was just going to say that I think we were so caught up in the demise of Eric Greitens that a lot of people didn't pay too much attention to the ascent of Josh Hawley. I think in terms of political ambition, I think Hawley makes Eric Greitens look relaxed and almost like a sloth. I don't think this guy makes a misstep. I think he knew that he was underneath the WashU's endowment cap, or that WashU was underneath that cap. I think he did it deliberately, and I don't think it was a misstep.
Well, don't you guys think that he has a lot of donors who are sitting on the WashU Board of Trustees, and his first endorsement came from John Danforth, and WashU is on the Danforth campus?
Yep.
Yeah, but I'm still, even with all that, I am still convinced that he did not even think about it. He just went charging, and that's how it, went down. And this is a week where Washington University got $2.2 billion. They're going to furlough 1,300 people for what, 60, 90 days? And $1 billion is 1,000 suitcases with $1 million in it. So they got 2,000 suitcases with $1 million in it, and they're worried about that. I mean,
well, Alvin, I think they have an $8 billion endowment. It's a great institution, and they're suffering right now. You have to admit, they've got students who are going to be wanting refunds on their tuition, and who knows what kind of students they're going to get in the fall, even if they have a fall semester.
But Charlie, if I had $8.8 billion, that was mine. Okay, whatever came up, if the cat jumped up here and said he needed $10 million, I'd probably write him a check because he's my cat.
Reuben.
Right? So Reuben. So I mean,
Charlie, I don't think the university.
Josh Hawley went to Yale, and he's upset about Harvard. This is like Alvin who went to KU, always ready to talk about Missouri. Always ready to talk about.
True.
Well, and that was Moji. Sorry. First of all, I think as far as Washington U hurting, I think the furloughed employees are hurting a little more in Washington University right now. But I do think that Missouri is basically flyover country to Josh Hawley at this point. So I don't know if it was an oversight or not, as much as he's just so focused as a national politician. And Bill's point is interesting. He didn't go to any great lengths to say, yeah, as a fellow Ivy Leaguer, I know a lot about this.
No, he didn't.
That's not part of his persona.
Hey, Wendy, I want to talk to you about another leader. The Attorney General for the state of Missouri, Eric Schmidt, is suing China because he says China's responsible for this coronavirus pandemic. They hid information. They wouldn't allow our scientists in, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think in Beijing they're quivering right now because a guy in Jefferson City, Missouri filed a lawsuit?
I don't think they're quivering right now, but that's because we're still sort of in the middle of this fire, if you will. I think that when all the dust settles, there are going to be calls from around the world. And when it comes to one's political star, he's trying to push it up there. He's another one with ambitions, and this is name recognition, and people might be making fun of it. Where is he going to send the lawsuit? Who's he going to serve in Beijing? But they're going to, I think China is going to care when the dust settles. Nikki Haley today was calling on Congress when this is over to start an investigation into China, what happened, when they knew, what they knew, or what they knew and when they knew it. That old chestnut. But China's gonna be held accountable, I think, around the world when this is over.
Well, who are they going to call to testify? I mean, the chairman of the party over there. This is just silly. I mean, this is a waste of time. Oh, and by the way, it's one thing to sue somebody. If you could sue a sovereign country, there'd be 10,000 countries suing the United States of America, and all we'd be doing is settling these lawsuits because we were guilty. So this is craziness.
They got one American. They got one American.
Politics.
As a witness. You're the radio guy. Is Xi? Is that his name? The dictator of China? Xi. Yeah. He's only got one public defender in the U.S. and that's Trump. So, I mean, they might as well name Trump with him because he's the one that's been sticking up for him. And it's amazing to me that you hear Hawley, hear all these people going after China. The Chinese Communist government has had one spirited defender until about a week ago, and that's Trump.
I disagree with you, Ray. I don't think he has been defending China. I've watched all those press conferences.
He praised the guy in 2018 for naming himself dictator for life. He keeps talking about what a great guy he is.
Not the last 2 months. Not the last 2 months.
Yes, Charlie, actually, he did.
Wait, he may have once or twice, but by and large, he has not been complimentary of China. In fact, he's one who's called the Wuhan virus.
He defended it handling the virus in early February. Yes, he did.
No, not recently.
Yes, he did.
Maybe in late January. You're right, in late January. Hey, Bill McClellan, I want to ask you about these protests in Clayton, where
this isn't a Trump thing. This is a silly thing on the part of the idea that we're going to go over there and win hundreds of millions of dollars from the Chinese, and they're going to give us their money.
It's symbolic. It's symbolic of what's to come.
How about symbolism? Bill McClellan, when people who want to open up the counties have their protests driving around in automobiles, as they did in Jefferson City or in Clayton, Missouri this past week, do you think those protests have any effect whatsoever?
No, I don't, except to rile people up. But I don't think they have any effect, and I don't think they're really intended to have an effect. I think when these people go to them, it's like going to a rock concert. It's being around people who think like you. And, you know, when I was a young man, I didn't go to many protests or anything. But my friends who did it, it wasn't really that they were protesting as much as it was a fun thing to do and be with like-minded people. And I think that's going on now.
I agree with Bill, especially about the one in St. Louis and they had one in Kansas City that had very few people. I think in the one and Bill's right. I mean, they're having fun. They're making a statement. But I would say that the one in Jefferson City that had several hundred people apparently while it won't change anybody's mind, I think it gets the attention and kind of creeps out some of the legislators in Jeff City.
Oh, no,
but I don't think it
people in Jeff City. Several hundred people in Jeff City. I mean, we have several hundred people around here go to like neighborhood school board meetings. That's preaching to the choir and people out there just yahooing. More power to them, you know. But what pressure does it put on anybody? Because pretty much everybody's got their mind made up on what direction they want to go in.
I think any political advisor is going to tell the person they're working for that each one of those protesters represents X number of people who are like-minded but not willing to make the trip. And so I do think, to a degree, especially now with so many of these political leaders running for re-election and not knowing what in the world is coming down the road, I do think I think they pay attention to a degree. But I think you're all
let me be clear. Right. I'm not saying it's going to change anybody's mind. I think it is, especially in this case, difficult for the Republican legislators because they're getting intense pressure from both sides on this. Wendy made the point about Franklin County. There's intense pressure on Republicans more than Democrats on this particular issue, just because of where they're situated.
Hey, let's go to Kirkwood, Alvin, your hometown, in case our viewers don't know yet. You're also a Dallas Cowboys fan, and you've got a Cat Rubin, and of course, your Rock Chalk Jayhawk. But Kirkwood is near and dear to your heart. Now they've got the farmers markets up and running as of last Saturday. Hey, how critical can we be of Franklin County opening up if we have farmers markets open in St. Louis County, Alvin?
Well, the most intense, where as far as cases are concerned, in the city of St. Louis, and the Friday before Easter, which was Good Friday, I went to Soulard Market to put together, Easter dinner. I had no idea that the Kirkwood Market was going to open at any time this summer. It did. So I can't be critical of them because I was at Soulard Market. And there weren't a lot of people. We all had masks and gloves. Not all, but I was, even at that time, because we're going back, like I said, till the, I guess the 10th of April when I was there. Most people had masks and gloves on, and I did too. So I can't, it's one of those, I can't be critical of the fact that an open air market is now open in Kirkwood because it's been open all the time in St. Louis and Soulard Market.
The grocery stores are open. I mean, I don't, food is an essential thing. I mean, it's not, I don't know that, I don't know what the issue is really, but maybe.
Well, and I don't know. I also don't know if Soulard Market told, like, as spring is now, really getting warmer, they sell, you can have booths for everything, incense and little teeny pot or donuts. I will say that the places that you could buy food and like drinks at, they were open. And so that counted, I guess, as carry out.
How about that, Alvin? Have you had a carry out cocktail, which is now also legal in the state of Missouri? Have you?
Unexpectedly, I did.
Unexpectedly.
I did. I got
someone poured it down your throat.
I got Mexican food someplace at a carryout, and they had said that you can have a beverage in the parking lot, while you're waiting, which I was, and then the food came, like 3 minutes later, so I have a beverage and a straw, and I just drove home. So I guess I was not sipping on it while driving. I was just like, but I did have like whatever open air would be, I don't know what to think of this other than it pretty much is a bad idea.
Can we edit the show?
Let me understand, Mr.
I
Reid.
did not drink it.
So what it was somebody in another car recognized you from Donnybrook and sent over a drink, basically.
No, the Mexican restaurant. I ordered one in the parking lot because you could sit in the parking lot and enjoy your beverage.
And
That's
by
legal.
the way, you're critical of Franklin County opening up.
No, what I said was I was never indoors. I was never around anybody. Okay. It was, but
it's a carry-out order. You can't compare that to Franklin County.
Yeah. So what do you do if you've got your food and you've got this margarita? And one just could sit there and finish it, I guess, or one could just drive home.
The lawyer would advise you to stop, Ralph.
I don't know what I can't.
If I understand the rules, though, in Alvin's defense here, is that all the restaurants have been exempted by liquor control for having.
Yeah, you can buy liquor. Wait, what's her name?
Right.
What's her name? Margaret Donnelly,
with less than a minute to go. Is that a good idea?
Who had the margarita machine? She supports me. It's a bad idea. You should not have carry out.
The open container part of it in a car is a bit of a problem, but the beer and wine isn't. And by the way, on Soulard Market, I don't think that it's fair to have retailers be able to get around. In other words, I think if we're talking about food and you can go to Schnucks or Deerbergs, you should be able to go to a market. But I don't think you should be able to, people should use it to get, it's unfair to the retailers who are closed to do that at a farmer's market, I think.
No, I agree. And they weren't there. It was only food. There was only food.
Well, do we think that selling alcohol from a restaurant 30 seconds to go is a good idea overall? I mean, obviously, we want to make sure the restaurants are financially sound, and that's the whole point of this. Otherwise, we would not be selling margaritas to go.
It's totally fine. I think there is the open container part of it in a car, but as far as selling it, I think it's fine.
It's kind of funny because you could buy a beer that's contained in a bottle, Ray, and just pop it open while driving. What's the difference if it's open container or not?
Get stopped, but I think you should be able to sell that beer.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. That concludes the first half of this show. But as I say on my radio show, we'll be right back with Jason Purnell of Washington University. So don't go away.
Are you on?
What are you on? That's a shameless.
Are you on?
What station is that?
Yeah, what station are you on?
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hey, thanks for joining us for the second half. This is Donnybrook Part 2, and we are so honored for this edition to welcome Jason Purnell, who is the Director of Health Equity Works at Washington University. Currently, he's leading the COVID-19 Regional Response Team for the metro area. He's an associate professor at the Brown School at WashU, a psychologist by training, has studied at Harvard, Ohio State, go Buckeyes, and beyond. Hello, Doctor. Thanks for joining Donnybrook. How are you?
I'm good, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
And maybe a little more importantly, how do you think things are in St. Louis right now? We do know that COVID-19 has had an alarmingly high effect on the African-American population. And I know this has concerned a lot of community leaders.
It's certainly a concern. We know that the African-American community is carrying a disproportionate burden of this disease. Sadly, that's not a surprise given what we know about disparities in underlying chronic conditions, about the access to vital resources that make it more difficult for people to live in good health and to live long lives. And that's something we've been talking about for several years through the For the Sake of All report that was released back in 2014 that showed an 18-year gap in life expectancy between 63106 in North St. Louis City and 63105 in Clayton, and also laid out the factors that contribute to that kind of stark disparity. So when we see the zip codes that are lighting up on the map in terms of COVID-19 cases and COVID-19 deaths, many of us are not surprised to see this, even though we're alarmed.
Is there anything? Go ahead, Charlie.
No, I was going to say, Doctor, when you hear from federal officials, they keep stressing social distancing. Is there anything else we can do in the short run to alleviate this?
Well, social distancing and the guidance that's coming from the CDC and other public health officials is exactly the right thing to do. And the way that we have shut things down, I know is causing pain across multiple sectors of the economy and in people's lives. But this is really how we contain this virus. And we actually have a proud legacy in the St. Louis region of having done this successfully in 1918 and 1919 when we were dealing with an influenza pandemic. And we need to repeat that and remain vigilant. The fact that we're seeing fewer cases is not an invitation to open up. It's proof that the mitigation strategies are working, and that we need to continue to have those in place until we have all of the necessary testing and other activities that allow us to open safely.
Do you have any idea how long? Oh, I'm sorry, Evan.
On May 4th, as the governor wants to, St. Louis City and St. Louis County, it would be unreasonable in your estimation for us to open businesses and start getting back to normal on May the 4th?
I'm not convinced that we have the strategies in place that make that a wise decision. And I think that the discretion that St. Louis City and St. Louis County have to have more stringent orders in place, even as the governor lifts the statewide order, is the right thing to do.
How much do you think that we all agree that the city and county has been prudent and about this, but how much is the city county protected if surrounding counties or even the rest of the state open up and people from St. Louis go to those counties for services, come back and forth, and people from those counties come here? Are we connected enough that it's really going to have a detrimental effect on us?
Well, viruses don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. They don't respect rivers either. So it really does open us up in terms of vulnerability. I would prefer that we continue to have a statewide stay-at-home order in place. But to the extent that the governor has devolved this decision down to the local level, I think local jurisdictions need to make the best possible decisions that they can.
I have a question for you, Doctor. Is your organization statewide, or is it just regional? And exactly what do you do?
So it depends on which part we're talking about. In terms of the COVID-19 regional response team,
yes.
Coverage for that is 5 counties, and it's by state. So it's St. Charles, St. Louis County, and the city of St. Louis on the Missouri side, and it's St. Clair and Madison counties on the Illinois side. And really the purpose of the COVID-19 regional response team is to address the critical needs of the most vulnerable populations in the context of this pandemic. And when we say that, we're talking about, for instance, we've got active campaigns looking at the unhoused population in the St. Louis region, many of whom also have chronic conditions that make them at greater risk for the transmission of COVID-19, and are living in at-risk situations even outside the context of a global pandemic. We're also looking at homebound older adults and individuals with disabilities who aren't able to go to some of the food distribution sites that have opened up because of limitations in terms of physical abilities or transportation. We're also supporting our partners who are looking at some of the school feeding programs. So it's really about centering the needs of the most vulnerable populations rather than making those populations afterthoughts. How do we coordinate our activities across organizations, across jurisdictions, in order to respond to those needs in an efficient and effective way?
And Dr. Purnell, isn't that really the
for funding? Did you have funding for organizations, or how does that work?
We have been coordinating our efforts pretty closely with the St. Louis Community Foundation's Regional Response Fund, and really trying to make sure that that group knows of the critical needs. For instance, there's an initiative around the homebound older adults and individuals with disabilities that has been a close partnership with that Regional Response Fund. So we are using the information that we're gathering from a number of partners across the region to really elevate those needs so that funders, not just through the Community Foundation, but funders in general, know what those needs are and can respond.
And Dr. Purnell, I think it made all of us early in the early days of this crisis, I think it made us feel better to say that we're all in the same boat, we're all in this together, and everything you're outlining illustrates that we are obviously not all in the same boat. When it comes to those basic services that you are referring to, where are the biggest holes in the chain, if you will? I mean, where is it falling? Where are people and their needs sort of falling through the cracks? What do we need to do as a community to step up?
Well, there are a number of critical needs. I have to say one of my greatest disappointments, but also one of my greatest sources of hope has come in this issue of remote learning. Kristen Sorth, who is the director of the St. Louis County Library, is one of our key partners on the regional response team. And very early on, she and I were trying to identify hotspots. Kristen actually did a survey in partnership with one of our partners, Education Plus, to try and understand the need for mobile technology hotspots, which allow you to have access to the internet and also the hardware itself. Over 30,000 children across that 5-county area. She heard from over 40 schools and districts don't have access to that technology. And we weren't able, even though, heroic efforts were made to identify that work. But we're grateful to partners here on the 9 network who have really stepped up in partnership with DESE, the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, to make sure that people know that the PBS Kids programming that comes on this network is tied to curriculum standards, and also working with teachers to deliver instruction on the airwaves to try and at least make up for some of this instructional gap that children are missing. I'd say another area that is a desperate need is the personal protective equipment. We know that a lot of professions who aren't medical providers and aren't first responders, but are still on the front lines in terms of delivering vital services through businesses, are doing so very often without the proper protection to protect themselves. And we know that community members who are expected through CDC guidance to be wearing masks very often don't have access to those masks, or if they do, don't know how to properly use them. So we're very grateful for a communications campaign that also has a canvassing effort tied to it called Prepare STL, which is a partnership with several organizations actually working to take the message about COVID-19 into some of the most impacted communities with sandwich boards and posters, but also handing out PPE to business owners and really getting the word out for some of those most impacted communities.
Doctor, it sounds like you're saying every time we leave the house, should we have a mask on and should we have gloves on? I know that's an impossibility throughout an entire state, but would that be something that you would say, like, boy, if I could snap my fingers and just have it happen, that would happen?
I would certainly want everybody to have access to a mask and gloves to the extent that you're going to be in a grocery store and touching things that other people are touching in common. As long as you're being smart about washing your hands after you're out in public, at least for 20 seconds with soap and water, and not touching your face after you've been touching things out in public. That's really the guidance that people should be following. And the CDC does recommend that people are wearing masks.
Do you have any sense, doctor, of whether we're talking, there are a lot of folks hurting that are, have hair salons and lots of retail businesses that, understandably are seeing their lives, go before their eyes. Obviously, we all agree here that it's too early. Do you have a sense of whether we're talking weeks or months to where we can start phasing into something?
I don't have a strong sense of that. I'm hoping to learn more in conversation with the Metropolitan Pandemic Task Force and some of the conversations that I know are being had about, how do we responsibly reopen? And part of that responsible reopening has to be more widespread testing. That's got to be part of the equation. We've got to give guidance to these businesses that you're speaking about. So what does it look like to limit foot traffic, for instance, to have social distancing measures in place, and also to have some safety protocols in place so that not just patrons, but also the employees of these establishments can safely return to work. So unless and until we have those things in place, I'm not comfortable saying, let's just open up, because that's irresponsible.
In addition to
test it, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Doctor, how often do you get tested, or were you tested once, or how has that worked out for you? And then I got a follow-up question to that.
I have not been tested for COVID-19. And, for your viewers, I often say I'm not the kind of doctor who can help you if you're having a heart attack. I'm a psychologist by training, so I'm not doing any frontline clinical medical intervention, and haven't had any symptoms that would suggest that I need to be tested.
Well, as a psychologist, you clearly could help us more.
Yeah, we're gonna have a big group Zoom.
But let me ask you this. Does your good work? I have a question. This is going to end at some point, and there's no pushback, I don't think, to people discovering that communities of color are at greater risk here, and your good work is so needed, and the testing and so forth. Do you have a sense that on the other side of this, what you're doing is going to create any kind of framework for dealing with this after the virus, that the inequities and the injustices?
I really do. And I think we saw some movement, certainly in terms of greater awareness after the release of the For the Sake of All report that I mentioned in May of 2014, and obviously even greater resonance and awareness post-Ferguson after the killing of Michael Brown, only a few months after that report was released. I think we are beginning at least to reckon with the legacy of racial discrimination, residential segregation. We released a follow-on report called Segregation in St. Louis, Dismantling the Divide in 2018, which is really sort of a companion piece that says, how did we get to that outlay of zip codes where there's such disparate access to resources and opportunity? So I think there was already a great deal more awareness. I think what we have the opportunity to do now is follow that awareness up with some investment. And I think the kind of coordinated activity that I'm seeing and that I'm encouraged to see across sectors in this region is building some muscles. And what I've often said is St. Louis lacks a bit of civic infrastructure. We lack these common tables that everyone from the grassroots to the grass top sits around and makes determinations about what our common needs are and also how we solve problems together. And that, that's a result of our fragmentation, but it's also a result of our deep history of racial divides in the St. Louis region. And we're going to have to overcome that if we're going to both recover from this and be a thriving region going forward.
I know that regional response. I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doctor, as a psychologist with a background in public health, what do you make of the open it up protests? Do they surprise you at all, or what do you think of them?
I think they're an unfortunate reflection of a deep cultural strain in the United States, which says my individual liberty somehow overrules the common good. I know that, as we've been talking about the issue of health equity and health disparities over the past several years, what often gets brought up is this notion of individual responsibility, individual effort as sort of the only explanation for people's health and life outcomes. That if we just make better choices, or if somehow individuals are just more in charge of their own destinies, that we're going to see different outcomes. And that simply isn't true. We know that there are structural explanations that require wrestling with both history and wrestling with the ways in which resources get distributed throughout a region like St. Louis and around the country. So I see it as a failure to attend to the common good and a kind of an unfortunate pitting of individual liberty and individual license against the greater good, and in this case, with potentially fatal consequences.
Thank you.
A lot of your work has been based, according to your website, on a similar response team in Seattle, Washington. And in Seattle, after the Kirkland nursing home problem, and there were quite a few deaths there, actually, their counties seem to have responded very well, King County and others, with not only lower fatality rates than we have here, but lower incident rates when it comes to COVID-19. What is it about Seattle, for example, that seems to have handled this better than St. Louis and many other cities for that matter?
Well, I think you're thinking about the Regional Response Fund in terms of being modeled after Seattle. But one of the first things that I did was actually ask a very bright doctoral student named Karishma Furtado, who's worked with Forward Through Ferguson, to work with a number of other doctoral students and graduate students and faculty at both Washington University and St. Louis University to do a search on what has happened in other cities, what are the best practices, and learn from those to the extent that we can. I think sometimes in St. Louis, we think we're such special flowers that nothing that has happened anywhere else in the country could possibly be tried here. And of course, we know that that's not true. So we've also been on calls with our counterparts across the state in Kansas City to learn how they've responded to this crisis. And it goes back, I think, to the earlier point I was making about that civic infrastructure. You have an organization like MARC, and don't ask me to spell out what that acronym stands for, but it is a regional planning organization over on the Kansas City side where they do have this common table where problems are talked about, where solutions are offered. And I think that's something that we can do a better job of in St. Louis.
Dr. Purnell, as a psychologist with that incredibly important background right now, have there been things that you have seen in the community that have surprised you, maybe in a negative way, or surprised you in a positive way in terms of the way we're handling this as a community, the psychology of it?
I think it's mostly about information. So what we know is that information alone is not sufficient to change behavior. Whenever I teach a course called Health Behavior and Health Promotion, I make my students change a health behavior over the course of a semester. And that's for a couple of reasons, but primarily it's to teach them some humility. Changing behavior is hard. And getting people to change their behavior just based on data, just based on information, is typically insufficient to get that behavior to change. So what you really need are changes in norms. People need to see other people acting in a different way. People need to have trust in the sources of those information, of the information that they're receiving, and that's not always the case. We're hearing reports back from some of the canvassing that's happening that people simply aren't aware of some basic information about this virus and aren't trusting of many of the traditional channels through which that information might flow, whether that's government or traditional media. So that's why it's so important to have community members who look like those community members actually on the ground, and putting themselves at some risk to do so. These are community health workers and organizers who are putting feet to pavement to pass out flyers, to pass out PPE, to pass out soap, and going to places where folks are frequenting. They're going to gas stations, they're going to grocery stores, they're going to beauty supply, and other, laundromats. So it matters who's delivering the information. It has to be a trusted source, and people have to, one of the most basic principles in behavior change sounds really simple. It's from something called social cognitive theory. It's the notion of self-efficacy. And it simply says that if I believe that something I'm doing is going to have a good impact, and I believe in my ability to be able to do it, I'm more likely to do it. So when we give people good information about hand washing, about social distancing, and they believe that it will have the impact that we know that it will have, they're more likely to participate in that kind of behavior.
Have you addressed at all the nursing homes in our area, which, boy, we've been reading about some of the deaths in the nursing homes, and you were mentioning hot spots. I can't think of any spots that are hotter than where our elderly are living right now.
Yeah, we haven't had a particular focus on nursing homes, but we have been in conversation with both the city and the county Department of Health, and I know that is high on their list of priorities in terms of addressing both the protocols in nursing homes and any outbreaks in nursing homes. But certainly our partners in the aging space have kept that front and center for us. And to the extent that we can help with that, we certainly will help with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have just about a minute to go. And again, you're the leader of the COVID-19 regional response team in the greater St. Louis area. What information or words of the wise would you have for our 9 network viewers as we get about to liberate you?
Well, I think if people can hang in there with the social distancing, with staying at home, and really try to consume reputable information. So information that's coming from the CDC, for instance, and not listening to the latest rumor or the myth that's being propagated. I think that's what's going to land us in the best possible situation. And I just have to mention that I've seen so many people across this region working really night and day to try and make sure, whether it's healthcare, whether it's nonprofit organizations, whether it's philanthropy, folks in the business community truly are working very hard to try and mitigate the effects of what's truly an unprecedented challenge that most of us have never seen in our lifetimes. And I hope we don't see it again.
Dr. Jason Purnell from Health Equity Works at Washington University. Thank you so much for joining us on Donnybrook.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week at this time. Thanks for joining us, and be safe.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.